In this tutorial, we're going to show you how to configure crawling for two web servers called Amsterdam and Athens and run some common searches. Some of the content will be mirrored, like in the painters directory. Some of the data will be unique, like in the medical or health directories. Some changes will occur frequently, like in the GSA directory, so we'll have to set up freshness tuning. Some of the content will include metadata, like in the ranges directory, so we'll have to run some metadata searches. Some of the content will be secured by credentials, like in the restricted directory. We won't show you how to set this up yet, but we'll show you how to troubleshoot it. We'll begin by investigating the content on the web servers. We'll configure basic crawling and run some initial searches. Then we'll configure some additional crawl settings, including duplicate hosts, back-off retries for removing content, document dates for identifying the location of the document dates, maximum URLs and host load, so you can control how much content gets indexed and when, and perform some common administrator tasks such as adding users that can configure the GSA, importing and exporting the configuration for backup, and exporting URLs for troubleshooting. Let's begin by looking at the content on the Amsterdam server. There's an identical set of content on the Athens server under the Google Training directory. Here you'll find a number of subdirectories that we want to selectively crawl. Documents in the health directory will treat as unique and only crawl in the Amsterdam server. In here we find Word document, spreadsheet, and PDF document. These links are listed in a simple HTML document as a jump page, but you could alternatively use a sitemap or even a directory listing. There is also a broken link to a non-existent document that we'll get an error for, and a link to a document outside of your domain, which we will not want to include in the follow-on crawl. Let's look at the painters directory that we will specify in the follow-on crawl patterns for both the Amsterdam and the Athens server. To avoid crawling us twice, we'll set the servers in a duplicate host configuration. Inside the directory, there are several HTML files containing content on various painters, such as Claude and Monet. Next, let's look at some content that gets updated frequently. In the GSA directory, we have a document that gets dynamically generated every 15 minutes, and the script that generates this file inserts a timestamp. This will be useful for troubleshooting to make sure that your crawler is working. Now let's look at the ranges directory, which contains HTML documents with embedded metadata tags in them. Later we'll search for the word pspod in the generator tag, and we'll perform integer range-based searches on the region field. The directory called protected includes 3 HTML documents, but they will not be crawled because the robots.txt file will not allow that directory to be crawled for all crawlers. There is a directory called restricted secure A that requires user credentials in order to get the content. We will not configure crawler access, so we will not be able to crawl the directory. To set this up, point your browser to port 8000 on your GSA and enter in your administrator credentials that allow you to get access to Admin Console. Go to Crawl and Index, Crawl URLs, and here you find that the content in the GSA directory has already been set up under the start pattern and a follow-on crawl pattern, so the content has already been crawled. To view its status, go to Crawl Diagnostics. Drill down to the content, and there view its link to active content on the Athens server and its cached link to the document stored in the GSA. Then look at the crawl history for this document, and here you'll note that the crawler is recrawling the content every 5 to 12 minutes. This is what we would expect for a document that's changing every 15 minutes, if we instruct the crawler to crawl it more frequently using freshness tuning. Now let's run some searches. Point your browser to port 80 on your GSA. Run a search for the term thank you. This is the term that's used in the document stored in the GSA directory. Here you can follow links to the document stored on the Athens server, as well as the link to the document cached in the GSA's index. If you run a search for health or medical, you won't get any results yet because we haven't configured those directories to be crawled by the search appliance. To configure the search appliance to crawl these directories, return to the crawl URLs page. Here we'll specify the medical directory on Amsterdam and the health directory on Athens, and 3 more directories on Athens: the GSA directory that already has the content crawled, the protected directory protected by robots.txt file, and the restricted secure A directory that has restricted content and will get errors for. Since we're referencing directories, make sure that you use the trailing slash. We've also specified a do not crawl pattern that restricts the crawler from following links inside of any directory with the name underscore layouts in it. In crawl diagnostics, note that the crawler has started crawling the 2 servers. But if you drill down on the links, you'll find that not all the documents have been found yet. Give it some time, refresh the page, and you'll note that all of the directories have been discovered. Doesn't necessarily mean all the documents have been crawled and indexed yet. Note that the health directory has found 6 documents with 1 error, the protected directory no documents and no errors, and the restricted directory no documents and 1 error. Let's investigate these now. In the health directory, we see that we got a 404 file not found error for the link that was a broken link. When we drill down on the spreadsheet document, we can click on its cache link, but we get the unauthorized error, which is an indication that the document is not fully indexed and cached. If you drill down on the protected directory, you'll find that you have found a document. That was the jump page, but it was disallowed by the robots.txt file. If you drill down on the restricted directory, we'll find the authentication failed error. This makes for a good example to show the real-time diagnostics and the header traffic going back and forth between the content server and the GSA. To do this, copy and paste the URL into the real-time diagnostics page and click the fetch button. What this does is have the crawler simulate a fetch to the content server. Here you see the 401 returned error and authentication failed. Now that our documents are crawled, let's run some test searches. We run a search for medical. We find content from the Amsterdam server. Here's the jump page. And we click on one of the documents, their text version for the spreadsheet. We find the HTML document that's generated and stored in the cache. When we search for health, we'll get results from the Athens server. Now that we've configured basic crawl and run some basic searches, let's go back to the administration console and configure some additional crawling settings. On the crawler schedule page, you can specify whether to remove documents immediately when you encounter an error or retry them at various intervals that you define on a code-by-code basis. In this case, we'll specify for authentication failures to remove the documents from the index immediately and not recrawl them. To speed the process of removing documents from the index when they're deleted from content servers, redefine the 404 action here. On the HTTP headers page, you could define the name of the crawler that's used for the robots.txt file. By default, it's GSA crawler. By default, all document dates are retrieved from the last modified date returned by the web server, unless otherwise specified. Here we'll specify that we want the documents from the GSA directory to obtain their date from within the body text of each document. That's where we inserted our timestamp. Remember to list more specific rules at the top, because the first rule found from top to bottom will win. You can accept default host load schedule settings or define your own. Here you can specify how many URLs to include in the index, the maximum file sizes to consider for indexing, and you can specify the average number of connections between the GSA and a given web server. Here we'll increase that setting for all servers from 4 to 8 and define an exception to the Shanghai server so that it only has connections open up half the time. Under coverage tuning, you could specify document count limits on a pattern-by-pattern basis, but we will not specify any. Under freshness tuning, we have one pattern that we want to crawl more frequently than others. That's the GSA pattern, where the document's changing every 15 minutes. We did not include any other patterns to crawl less frequently or force recrawling every time. Sometimes you'll have duplicate content on multiple servers. Here you specify directories for both servers in start and follow and crawl patterns. We'll set this up for the painters directory on Amsterdam and Athens. Then we'll set up a duplicate host entry so only the canonical server gets crawled. In this case, it'll be Amsterdam. Be sure to enter the duplicate host entry before you enter the start and follow and crawl patterns. Then go to Crawl Diagnostics and note that under the Athens server, the painters directory does not exist. Go to the Amsterdam server and you'll find the painters directory. As before, it may take some time for the content to be fully indexed and searchable. Here we enter the search term Monet and get no results. While we're waiting for content to be indexed, let's do a little troubleshooting. Enter the in_URL search term followed by a name of one of the directories in the path. Here we'll see that there's no content for the painters directory. Then enter the search term info: followed by the URL to the document you're looking for. When you see no results, you can be certain that the document's not in the index, and this is a very good generic troubleshooting tool. When you think the crawl-in index is done, run another search for Monet. Here you see results. When you run a search for Claude, you'll see more than one result in the same directory, so you get directory crowding. Click the link below to expand the search. If there are more results, it'd be shown. Rerun a search with the info search term, specifying a URL. Here you see results, so you know the content is in the index. Then run a search with the link search term. You'll get a list of documents that have links pointing to your target URL. In this case, it's the painters directory listing page. We've searched for documents based on their text. Now let's look for some metadata. Remember, we have some documents in the ranges directory with some embedded meta tags. We're going to search for generator with the value pspod and region tags, which are integer based. You can search for words or values in metadata fields just like you would for text in a document. In this case, we enter in pspod, and any documents with pspod as a word in one of the meta fields will be returned. By default, metadata will not be returned in search results, but you can add an additional search parameter and modify the style sheet to display the results. We'll cover this in more detail later, but here's an example. With the getFields parameter, you can specify which metadata is returned. In this case, with star, we got all fields. And with the default style sheet, each metadata field and value is shown as a name-value pair. To run an exact match lookup on a specific metadata field, enter in the inMeta: operator. Specify the name of the field like generator, equals, and its complete value. In this case, pspod returns no results because that's only a portion of the value in the fields. You can perform a partial lookup on a specific field using the tilde operator. Notice that pspod does return results now. To perform integer value region-based searches, specify inMeta: the name of the field, and then the two integer values separated by 2 periods. In this case, we'll look for values between 1 and 5 for region. Now we're done setting up basic crawl and serve. Let's look at a couple of additional administrative tasks. To add a user with admin console privileges, go to Administration, Users. Here you specify the username, email address, and password for the user, and whether they're an administrator or manager. Managers can only manage collections and front ends that you give them permissions to manage. In this case, the sales admin will have permissions to modify the default collection and default front end. To view this user's permissions, log out of Admin Console and log back in as this user. Notice that this user only has permissions to the default collection, the default front end, crawl diagnostics, and some other status and reports, and the ability to change their password. Going back to Admin Console as an administrator, There's one more final point. Make sure that the network settings has the SMTP mail server set up so the email notification can be sent to the new user, which provides their username and password. It's a good idea to export and test your configuration so that you have a backup should anything go wrong. To do this, go to Administration, Import and Export, specify a passphrase under the Export section, and click Export. This will save the configuration as a text file, which you can open and view. Then test your configuration file by importing it. Click Choose File in the Import section, enter the passphrase, and click Import. The last thing we want to do with basic crawl and serve is to export your URLs and get familiar with looking at that file so you know how to troubleshoot them. To do this, go to Status and Reports, Export URLs, and select the type of report you want to generate, whether you want to export all URLs, indexed URLs, or URLs that you had issues with. In this case, we'll get a list of URLs that we had problems with. The report gets exported as a CSV, and I've imported it into a spreadsheet. Here you see the list of URLs, the crawl frequency, which means whether it's being crawled more frequently with freshness tuning or not, its state, and in this case we have authentication failed, robots exclusion, and 2 URLs not found. Whether it's currently in flight, which means it's in the indexing process, how many errors occurred, and whether it's in the index or not. That's it for this tutorial on basic crawl and serve. In this demonstration, we crawled 2 web servers, Amsterdam and Athens. Some of them had unique content, some of them had mirrored content. Some of the content changed frequently, some of the content had metadata, some of the content was blocked by a robots.txt file, and some of the content was secured by credentials. Then we ran some test searches, and we saw how to troubleshoot some of the issues using the crawl diagnostics, real-time diagnostics, running basic searches and searches with the info and link search operators, and exporting the URLs. For more details, see documentation or additional training, including this tutorial's corresponding concepts tutorial.